So we should be about live now. Yes, that's what YouTube Studio is telling me. And this is what my own stream is saying. Okay, guys. This is MarkTech. This is a brand new video. My god, I'm on a roll. But that remains to be seen how well you take it, right? So today's video is all about Apple's upcoming VR glasses slash headset slash mixed reality slash augmented reality slash virtual reality device. We don't have full details like we usually do whenever we are talking about like new iPhones and new iPads, and that's partially just basically because we don't yet have a baseline. We don't have like a mission statement from Apple on what they want it to be. Now we do have some references. Basically, we have rumors primarily from Mark Gurman, but we do have statements repeatedly from Tim Cook saying that augmented reality is considered a priority for them, and over the years, especially at WWDC, and throughout Apple software launches, Apple has launched more and more augmented reality features. They've even introduced hardware like the LiDAR sensor on the back of the Pro iPhones, which helps you scan the environment, sort of we suspect would be needed for a very high-end augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality headset, no matter what it's actually going to focus on. And then we do have different rumors based on if we are talking about a full-on headset, something similar to, let's say, PSVR 2 and the latest Oculus, the latest Meta Quest Pro. And of course, or is it going to be more similar to something more like Google Glass, which obviously was somewhat of a spectacular failure in comparison to what people expected it to be in the end, but it's still, it basically worked for internal purposes and some showroom stuff, but it never became a real product. And then there are also like higher end mixed reality devices like the Microsoft HoloLens, but we also did get recently rumors that Microsoft is basically gutting the division after a deal with the military fell through. So yeah, that basically leaves like the market for Apple very wide open. Meta being the only real established player, and Sony about to enter again the gaming VR space, but that's not going to be something that directly competes with whatever Apple is doing. Now, that was a long introduction, but for me, comparatively short. I hope to keep this video under 1 hour. Regardless, let's get started. And I once again want to thank Mac Rumors, Apple Insider, all those rumor aggregation sites, especially when it comes to those comprehensive pages like what I'm going through. And I've changed my ad blocker in comparison to the last video, so you won't get bleeding eyes from watching all the Germany-specific ads that I'm getting here. So, let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. This is MarkTech speculating hard because we simply don't know on Apple glasses. By the way, I opened now a can of Coke, so if Cola ever wants to sponsor me, I'm fully on board, especially the Zero products. Maybe in a million years. Okay, so Mac Rumors summarizes it at a glance at Apple investigating multiple ways for virtual and augmented reality and how they can be implemented across iOS devices or new hardware, for example, like a real headset. Their support for those technologies has ramped up over the years, and this is an outdated statement that an augmented reality product could launch as soon as 2022. Now, it should be mentioned that whatever we are supposed to be getting this year is kind of delayed internally from last year, so maybe there is some truth to that, based on internal timelines, but obviously Apple never has talked yet about a headset or any kind of glasses, so I wouldn't put too much into that. The rumored products are smart glasses, sort of similar to what we know from Google Glass, or an AR VR headset. So this is basically an introduction to the topic, similar to what I have done, that Apple has increased hiring, has increased patents for it. This was sort of one of the first, like, very early on, like how people imagined it might look. We do have rumors coming from Min-Chi Kuo, very reliable. Mark Gurman, also pretty reliable. And they're all pointing to a launch for 2023 for the VR headset or mixed reality headset. And for glasses in 2024 or 2025. Now, however, this site has been updated about 2 weeks ago, so we go to something newer, is that Apple basically postponed the glasses indefinitely, simply because the technology to make something that fully processes your data or even just streams data back and forth constantly to your iPhone with like a lot of bandwidth, to have that with a high quality screen, maybe some kind of projector that like projection image directly into your retina, that ultimately would be a retina display, right? Something like that technologically, even if we are talking like 3 nanometer chips to power it, maybe we are talking like the latest Sony sensors, stuff like that, the latest LiDAR sensors. Maybe even if we go to like 2 nanometer in like 2025 or 2026, it's not quite clear we can actually achieve workable like battery life, because glasses like this would need to last you basically a full day. Now, they could basically become regular glasses afterwards, right? Like the battery runs out and you just have a regular pair of glasses. However, anything below 8 hours would be a catastrophe, and I honestly believe anything below 12 hours would be highly problematic with how just people's days work. So I'm not sure how feasible the glasses will be. I apologize for putting glasses in my thumbnail, and I believe in my title. But fundamentally, we will be talking for now about headsets. And part of that rumor that Apple is indefinitely delaying those glasses is the fact that they are focusing on a differently priced headset. We will get to the rumors about how the current headset is supposed to be priced, basically the one that we are supposed to get sometime this year. But supposedly Apple is working on one that would be more comparably priced to the iPhone. Mac Rumors is summarizing that it's between $799 and $1599. So maybe we would be looking at a price of like $999 or $1299. It's very difficult, obviously, to say also with how inflation will develop, just how big the R&D department for such a product will be, and just how mass market friendly this product ultimately turns out to be. Whether or not it's actually worth making a product like this at an affordable price, or whether it might make more sense to just appeal to a more niche enthusiast crowd who would also pay a high margin on top. So those are the rumors basically contradicting the other rumors, but basically that's what always happens when new stuff arises. Now, we are supposed to be getting multiple 3D sensing modules for detecting hand gestures, objects, and we will support voice control, skin detection, spatial detection, and expression detection. That is kind of different to what we usually see from devices like the Meta Quest Pro and what I'm also going to mention, the PSVR 2, because those have very elaborate controllers. And I think that in order to make it more mass market friendly, to make it more approachable, more intuitive, sort of to have that Steve Jobs moment, like for those of you who remember, like the you had me at scrolling moment when he was talking about the iPhone touchscreen user interface. So I doubt that this will come with like very elaborate controllers and focus directly on hand gesture recognition and stuff like that. Again, we still aren't fully sure, but who knows, right? As for the individual specs points, I will come to that later. They are designing an app store that is part of what Apple considers, in my opinion, basically essential across most of their products. The fact that they have a lot of apps, a lot of functionality, it's sort of similar to anybody who like plays games. Like if you look at a console can have like the best specs, but if it doesn't have the games to back it up, it simply won't be a successful product. In comparison, something like the Nintendo Switch, which by all accounts has abysmal hardware for 2023, is still selling rather well because it has a solid first-party lineup of games. And I think that while Apple might not be focused on games here, I think the idea will still be to have full iMessage support, like services like Apple Music, especially like Apple TV, and then to also have like a similar control level over what they have now with the iPhone, which ironically they might be about to lose due to EU regulations forcing side loading, but I doubt that this would apply to this headset. So that's kind of an interesting conundrum where Apple is launching this into the market. Like, will they focus on like software revenue coming in? How substantial will that software revenue be? And what will that software consist of? Will it be more like a very kind of consumer focused iPhone level software with like lower level games similar to what we saw with the Quest 2? Will we see some higher end games similar to what we will see with PSVR 2? Or will it be like a mix of all of it and Apple might still be confused on what developers will actually want to do with it? Now we are talking about a suggested price of $2,000. Basically, the range is somewhere from $1,500 to $3,000. This is why 3,000 is in my thumbnail. So it's very difficult to say. Quite honestly, I think Apple might even accept like selling it at cost. Apple isn't known to really sell at a loss, but if like they just make 2 or 3 million off it and want to just gain some market share and then launch a cheaper product while making this the second generation of this headset more expensive, it's all basically open to them based on like what the actual margins are, based on how much they prefer like market penetration versus the risk of just launching something too expensive but also making the money back on it. They say it will focus on VR with some limited AR capabilities, but they do have deeper augmented reality ambitions. Now we do see that all of the time, like recently, like their maps have gotten like augmented reality directions, and it also works like even indoors in certain stores. So it remains to be seen, like it with like third party support, not quite natively in the app as far as I know. So there is a lot of AR ambition from Apple, but I think the current products they have just don't quite match how AR is supposed to be. And I think that this is probably like the best kind of thing with like the Google Glasses example, like that you do have a normal pair of glasses and then you basically have what it says, an augmented version of reality. You do have your software basically put on top with like weather, your messages, your calendars, your reminders, stuff like that. And if Apple launches a glasses device, I'm absolutely convinced that this is what it would be like. It would not focus on stuff like gaming. It would be very, very different. But ultimately, I also don't think that even this is quite ready. So or will it be more like this? And that is what every rumor sort of is currently pointing towards, and that is that we are supposed to be getting a headset similar to what Oculus is doing, similar to what we have seen from multiple companies, but with very varying levels of success. Now, they do describe virtual reality as being singular, focused on immersive content consumption. Partially a part of that will be games, so that remains to be seen how big the support will be. While augmented reality might sound less exciting, because it does have a wider range of potential applications, and we have seen, for example, like Microsoft's HoloLens, like used for like 3D engineering, basically inside this AR world. We have seen it for like military exercises to simulate stuff on top of your environment. So it's interesting. I think that the first device will be the headset, and we have seen some things pointing towards it coming pretty soon, at least an announcement. And the main reason for that were the recent launches of the MacBook Pro and the HomePod, which, by the way, I reacted to. Please watch those videos, leave likes, subscribe, and comment. But the most important part about it is that those reveals were supposed to be part of a combined keynote, maybe coming sometime in March or WWDC, or maybe it was supposed to come in January, right? But then the headset part of it was cancelled, which resulted in those devices now being free to be launched onto the market, while the headset will now be reserved for a March event or a WWDC event. Maybe in worst case scenario, if there are other like 3 or 6 months of delay, maybe like a September event, but we simply don't know. Like, the reason why January was a good month is because that's when Apple sort of usually introduces new products. That hasn't been the case for Apple Watch and AirPods, for example, but it was the case for the iPad and for the original iPhone. So that would have been cool, but ultimately I don't think it will matter much. The most likely thing we are currently talking about is a March event, or a sort of worst case, a WWDC event. But take it all with a grain of salt. Now, the design is sort of like a mix of all kinds of rumors that we have seen over the year. So they say the information even saw a prototype. We do have renders from Ian Zelbo. We do have like a lot of stuff just in general, also from Front Page Tech over the time. But then basically a lot of those leakers became more silent, as they weren't quite confident with when it's coming out, what exactly it's going to be like. So we are supposed to be getting this curved glass front. Now, this looks very simplistic. I don't know how well Apple will be able to embed all those like LiDAR sensors and cameras in it to make them invisible, but I would expect the front to be a little more busy. Now, on top, we do have a singular button. There were some rumors of Apple maybe integrating the digital crown from AirPods Max and basically the Apple Watch, which I would consider like good thinking. And then we have like a soft mesh fabric, kind of where you are putting your face against, which is supposed to be soft, supposed to be very comfortable, supposed to retain its form very well. So once you put your face there, it doesn't just have an indentation making it unusable for anybody else. It's supposed to like go back to how it was. And then on top, we are basically getting on top or to the sides, however you want to see it, right? We do have the headband here. Now, this is very AirPods Max inspired, while the actual like connector here is very like Apple Watch band inspired. It would be fun to see Apple migrate designs this way. It might also be part that Apple just uses these kinds of designs as like prototypes, but then it changes in the final steps. But I do think it looks cool. Now, we did have rumors about it being basically interchangeable, so for design purposes and maybe even for some extended like battery life or other functionality, you would be able to put those bands back on and off. But newer rumors suggest that, again, they also say that new information indicates that it's no longer swappable. And there was also the rumor of them working on a headband with spatial audio technology. We don't know what that's going to be like, whether or not it just has like some headphone accessory easily. It's supposed to work with AirPods Pro utilizing the H2 chip. So for like extreme low latency connectivity, but we also aren't sure about that. And then that would also open up questions. Well, what about H1 devices? And what about like any kind of 3.5 millimeter or USB-C based headset basically, or headphones. So it's again, they are describing basically the basis of a VR headset, which is that it blocks peripheral vision, that basically everything that goes into it is processed through cameras. Now, anybody who's like experienced like transparency mode on AirPods like knows that Apple's actually quite good in taking external data, digitalizing it, and then giving it back to you as if it's live. But that remains to be seen how good it will actually work with video. Now, they do say the March prototypes were around 200 to 300 grams, which would make it actually lighter than most VR devices. We are going to get to the tech specs of the others later on. So in this place, this is actually interesting. We are supposed to be getting 4K micro LED displays. The pixel density is not quite as important on those devices because it all depends like on how the angle basically is projected to your eye. So obviously high resolution is still better, and that results in higher pixel density, but you cannot compare those pixel densities to how you would do on a phone because first of all, your viewing distance is different, and you do have the lenses in between, so it's not the same thing. We are supposed to be getting those displays from Sony and maybe some from Samsung. It's kind of a mixed bag. So whatever will happen is going to be very advanced. Now, the difference to OLED, there are two different technologies. First is OLED, as we all know from our phones and most phones, and we do have micro LED, which would be like an sort of like an LED panel, but like with every pixel being a diode, so to emit light, sort of how with OLED, but out of very different materials, some different technologies to power it basically. And micro OLED does use like the organic nature of OLED, but it's directly on the chip wafers rather than a glass substrate. That is more expensive, but it will make the display thinner, smaller, and dramatically more power efficient. Now, again, power efficiency being probably the most important part of such a device. So it does allow also to just put in smaller pixels there, which allows you to put more pixels, but then again, you still need the power to actually drive those pixels. So it's very unlikely that Apple would just go with like a billion pixels based on 3000 pixels per inch. Like, no, they will just have like the usual like between 4 and 8K based on how it works. Like, again, 8K total is kind of wrong here. like just because on one axis it might be 8K, it still wouldn't be like an overall 16:9 8K panel. But again, it will be high resolution, it will be sort of OLED, but more advanced, and it will be more efficient. Now, OLED in this case is good because, for example, when we go to the PSVR 2, no, let's go first to the Meta Quest. The Meta Quest, and I apologize for the light mode, so it does have two LCD panels with 1800 by 1920 pixels per eye, so it will have, so like this has much lower resolution than what the PlayStation, both the PlayStation and Apple's headset will have, and it does have local dimming backlight, while an OLED display will obviously be able to turn off individual pixels, while this has 500 individual LED blocks. Comparative to the PSVR 2, again, we do have the higher resolution of 2000 times 2040 in comparison to the Meta Quest, but that still would be at least a little like 10% off on like each axis versus Apple's solution, and we simply don't have like exact resolutions. Like it might also be like half of what Apple ends up offering in the final product. However, this is OLED, but then again, it's also regular OLED, so it's not micro OLED with like peak efficiency, peak pixel density, and everything else like that. It should also be mentioned that we are talking about like high refresh rate panels, because you will get motion sick if you have a low refresh rate, which also kind of brings up the Meta Quest again, because while it is somewhat high, I always forget like what exactly is its refresh rate. I believe it's somewhere below 120. I don't know why I didn't look it up before that. Blah 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 blah. I'm really sorry. This is once again riveting content. Command F. Refresh. Well, no. Does it have a hertz rating here? 6 gigahertz broadband spectrum. Yeah, it really has no mention of what its refresh rate is going to be like. Meta Quest Pro refresh rate. So it is 90 hertz. Yeah, so it doesn't go to a full 120 hertz. That kind of sucks. Again, like the PlayStation VR 2 will be better in basically every regard on that level, and it also has a wider field of view. Now, again, some will be like, oh, shut up about PSVR 2. Why aren't you talking just about Apple? That's not how competition works, first of all. Second, this is a very different device, so it's important to highlight how maybe a device that is not fully integrated, like this, will require a PS5 to work. Maybe at some point it will become compatible with PCs for gaming. But it will be a much better gaming headset. Like, even when we are going to talk about Apple's chips later, this will be better for gaming. And this is, by the way, why I have actually ordered one. Right, I will soon own a PlayStation VR 2, and I will make videos about it, and I will compare it to an Apple headset if I decide to buy the first generation of Apple's headset. It might be that Apple's pricing, it might not necessarily price me out of the market, right? I'm not afraid to spend $2,000, but it might simply not look worth it to me. So this is me being very fair here. I'm not even like pooping on Meta the way I usually do, because I'm just talking about their product. Now, it should also be mentioned that the Meta Quest Pro is $1,800. Now, we do have the much cheaper Quest 2, but that is a much worse device, and I don't think at all that it will, like, it might compete in terms of like overall units sold with Apple's headset, because it's so much cheaper at like $400. But I do believe that technology-wise, we do have to compare it to something like this, because if Apple wants to make a cheaper headset, they can, and they eventually will, and maybe even glasses. But the first generation will be more a competitor to this, While when we are talking about the PSVR 2, we are talking about a $550 device. I pre-ordered like for 650, like with a game and with the extra charging cradle for the controllers. But what should be mentioned here is that it will require PS5. It's also a wired solution, and it is a purely VR solution. Like there are very little like augmented reality elements about it. So this is a different product, and as a gamer, a player, if you so will. This is a good device, but it also doesn't compete with Apple directly. In my opinion, we simply do not quite have anything that will actually be competing in all kinds of functionality with the versatility of Apple's headset. And in that way, I do think that whatever Apple is doing now is the future in comparison to what others are doing. While Meta is basically also suffering from like its own like image perception in the industry. Like people simply don't like Facebook. They don't care maybe enough to still buy a Quest 2, but something like this, because also Facebook advertises it as like for your conference calls and something like that, I just no. And the weight is like also like 722 grams versus and 153 grams for the controller. Like when you look at the PSVR 2, what do we have here? They do not mention the weight. It should be also be of course said PSVR 2 is not a fully autonomous headset with its own chip and battery, so of course it will be lighter. So when we go to PSVR 2 weight, we are looking at below 600 grams. Did they say it exactly here? How heavy is the PSVR? That is, I believe, the original. So it will be lighter, but I cannot quite find like the exact weight. Shouldn't be though too bad in my opinion. Like it will definitely be lighter, and from what I understand about the original PSVR, it was very comfortable. So I trust them in that regard. So do they have, like, let's go to IGN. Thank God I have ad blocker on, otherwise this site is completely unbearable. Yeah, we do not have weight directly in the spec point. Very sorry, guys. Controllers, yeah. So it should be mentioned that I'm not talking about controllers because I just don't believe that this will really matter in comparison to what Apple is doing. Like Apple will focus on something that is more intuitive, more easily available, and something that would allow them to ultimately save money if their like hand recognition is so good. But we just aren't sure. So yeah, we do also have like something like the Quest 2 here, which does mention like a resolution. This is first a purely LCD screen, but with a much lower resolution per eye. Something like the Valve Index is just not very consumer friendly in my opinion. So yeah, that is basically what I think of the competition, right? A crappy device for the price, and a good device with a very different focus. While if we get back to Apple glasses, we are talking about the most advanced thing that will come to the industry, but that's why it will likely cost a lot more. So it will support prescription lenses, and it will feature 100-degree field of view, as you have seen. Like that would be the widest out of all of them, and like yeah, it would about match the Valve Index again. But it will also be much wider than 106-degree field of view of the Meta Quest Pro and the PSVR 2's 110. They do have small motors to adjust the internal lenses, so it's actually quite interesting, right? This will be a device that will obviously have to work with prescription lenses, so those will be able to attach to the headset using magnets. that remains so interesting to me. But let's see what happens. Now, there were rumors about a connected battery pack, and that is actually quite fascinating to me because, in my opinion, this is for a developer headset where you just connect your battery pack, and that will like just do the work, right? I don't think that it would be necessary a consumer headset, a consumer solution, unless it really just weighs 200 grams. Then basically it would need to pack most battery in there. But I'm not sure. I wouldn't bet on it that you would need a battery belt, basically like a Batman utility belt, to make it work. In terms of cameras, it will feature more than a dozen cameras for tracking hand movements, mapping the environment, capturing facial features. Now, the facial features stuff is supposed to be working for features like Memoji. And then, for example, if you have like a conference call, you are supposed to have like a Memoji or maybe a more realistic avatar of yourself. And then those facial features and body movements will be mapped to whatever you are doing. So that's kind of very interesting. It's supposed to feature like lifelike avatars that have accurate facial features captured by the included cameras. I also remain a little skeptical of how big of a focus that will be. I think that the market is widely rejecting like those kind of like metaverse things, but I think Apple will just offer it just to have it and to show that they have a much better solution than Facebook. And then basically on top of that, then they will talk about the actual features they care about, which is the headset working with all of their services, with them getting third-party app support, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so it would use like innovative biometrics. Obviously, if you have so many cameras, if you're mapping your face and stuff like that, I'm fully sure that Apple could introduce something like Face ID to this device. Maybe like an internal iris scanner could also be possible, but then again, that's also just speculation on my part. And they will also have like short and long range LiDAR scanners, which you might know from something like more autonomous vehicles nowadays that use LiDAR for safety reasons. And that will be used to map surfaces, edges, and dimensions of rooms. And for all of you who don't know, if you have a Pro iPhone with a LiDAR scanner, basically, you can use the Measure app for completely precise measurements, right? It is much faster. It like has like real objective data in comparison to cameras that always speculate a little bit and can be tricked more and don't work so well in poor lighting situations. LiDAR will not have that. So iris scanning, they will say it will integrate an iris scanner, so my speculation is supposed to be right. I actually don't remember reading that rumor. But that would obviously like we did have like Samsung devices with iris scanning previously, but a phone is just not positioned well for an iris scanning solution, while this would obviously be perfect for it. Processors. They say that 2 Mac level M2 processors. I don't think that it will be M2. Now that would actually be interesting if it had launched alongside the M2. I think a little bit of the confusion is maybe them launching alongside M2 devices. They do say it's 5 nanometer, not 3 nanometer. That being said, like I will put my own stamp on this, and I will believe that this is 3 nanometer. I will believe that this is like not quite an M3 chip, but maybe something like specific for this, where there might not be as much focus on like traditional stuff, but maybe it has like a much larger portion of silicon dedicated to like image signal processors and AI stuff, depending on what is needed actually here. Or maybe it will just be an M2. I'm sorry if I'm wrong here, but I do believe that it will be better than M2. So if I'm wrong, sue me, whatever you want to do, right? They say that because of unacceptable latency, Apple created its own custom streaming codec to allow the chips to communicate, and the dedicated ISP is able to translate distorted images captured by the external cameras with low latency. The headset will also include an H2 chip to allow the headset to form an ultra low latency connection with the second generation AirPods 2. Now, this is what I had mentioned before. They do say third-party earbuds do not work well because of latency problem. So it remains to be seen if you might be able to put something in if it has a USB-C port. So we simply don't know. Like, they also say Apple has completed work on the SoCs for the AR/VR headset and will optimize for wireless data transmission, compressing and decompressing video, power efficiency, and they do not have a neural engine like some of Apple's other chips. Well, that would basically negate it using Mac level M2 processors with 5 nanometer, because if it's coming at the end of the year anyway, then it can be built on M3 processor, and then it, I think what Mac Rumors means here is that they're they're M2 level processors. They're not Mac level M2 processors, because the M2 is already Mac level. And I think if we go to the Apple Insider stuff, yeah, they do also bring up the conundrum of are we talking glasses or the headset? They are talking about the features and the design. So basically a lot of what we talk about, that would actually be pretty sleek design, less aluminum focus and just fully glass, moving right into maybe what could be stainless steel, similar to the AirPods Max, the part of the band, but I'm not so sure. So processor, Apple could use a custom version of M1, M1 Pro, or M1 Max. So we basically don't simply know, right? And they are mentioning a resolution of 2160 by 2160 for each eye. So again, that's also still is they're comparing it to the HP Reverb. Okay, that is the resolution they're mentioning, and Apple's would be more like 8K, which would, depending on if we are talking maybe 8,000 times, I don't know, times 4,000 actually, that would be insane. If we have two 4x4 K panels, that is 32 million pixels. That would be quite difficult to render. So I do think that it will be below that. Not because of technical limitations of a micro LED panel, but more to do with the processing power needed here. Now, there are some technologies that Apple Insider brings up that could reduce the strain on the processor, and that is foveated rendering. Foveated rendering basically sees where you see, and then everything that you aren't viewing in focus, that can be out of focus basically. So it would replicate your regular eyesight, which is what you focus on, is actually in focus, and the rest is not. And while that might sound well, why would it do that? Well, that would be to reduce the internal strain on the processor to actually render whatever you aren't actually looking at. And for example, the PSVR 2 does have a similar technology for games. But then again, we also need super low latency technology for that. So who knows? So when we also go back to Mac Rumors, again, we simply don't know. Here it says it's M2 level. There they compare it to M1. This is basically the consensus that it's faster than M1. How much faster remains to be seen. And basically, if it's in its own solution, the question will be just how custom is it? Naming, I really don't care about naming. Some might say it's called the Reality Pro or the Reality 1. It might be called Apple Reality like in my opinion, with how they are, how they have named like Apple Watch and stuff like that, Apple TV. The operating system, they are calling it internally XROS, at least according to rumors, or Reality OS or ROS. And then the final name is supposed to be the less generic XROS. Yeah, that there's supposedly like two different operating systems, one that is more focused on the glasses and one that is more like focused on the headset. So we would be getting like XROS right now, and maybe some version of it, but maybe still called XROS, maybe not called XROS on glasses. This is so convoluted, guys. We are 45 minutes in and I'm still like talking about basics because this is so different, and I hope that in future videos, whenever there are like new rumors, I can just use this as a baseline and expect that you know what I'm talking about. So they do mention things like FaceTime here as well. Cooling, when we were talking about the processor, it's supposed to have a fan in its headset, which kind of makes sense because you aren't going to put in a lot of like copper or aluminum into it for cooling, so you would probably want to rely on active cooling. This would prevent overheating, especially if you're using it in like a hot environment. And it does have to process two simultaneous graphical feeds. So I am inclined to actually believe this one. Also, it's a small addendum, and why I also won't be like saying like at this minute we are talking about design, because we are always talking about everything, is we also have part of the design, this top band that would obviously help redistribute weight across your entire head. So going back to Mac rumors, so they do have like FaceTiming someone with 3D emojis. We do have an all-encompassing 3D digital environment where there's supposed to be like a media hub, sort of like a PlayStation Home or whatever whatever Facebook is like doing with their metaverse, right? I'm not sure. That's not how I know Apple, and they have distanced themselves from the term metaverse. So I'm kind of inclined to think that they just have a very pretty interface. Maybe it's a little immersive, but it's not like a digital Walmart that you walked into. And then you access basically all your features in like a more 3D way than you would do on an iPhone, where Apple has repeatedly worked on simplifying the user interface, making it more 2D, making it basically like move away from you. It's similar in how the iPad is like envisioned as like a big piece of glass that is completely interactive and where everything just gives way to your interactions. It's not supposed to like take you time to actually understand where you are in 3D space. It's not supposed to put you into some BS kind of environment that confuses you. So I'm sure it will not be like Meta's, but I wouldn't put it past them to have a little fun with it. They say it will support Wi-Fi 6E. Now it will support connectivity on the 6 GHz spectrum. It might be for better connectivity to the iPhone that is supposed to be getting Wi-Fi 6E later this year. With all the delays, who knows, it might be Wi-Fi 7 at some point, but I'm pretty sure that after Wi-Fi 6E now came to the MacBook Pro, the iPad Pro, and that it will most likely make its way into the next iPhone, maybe Pro, maybe all of them, so that this will be at least Wi-Fi 6. They do mention some development troubles. This is why the launch of the headset was supposedly delayed from 2021 and then shipping in 2022 to now being shown in 2023 and being also released in 2023. And part of that will be maybe like a March event to show it off. And then talking about the actual software and development tools at WWDC. As for its history, I will leave it at that. Pricing around $3,000. Again, we did get a wide range of rumors about that, and we did have like release date rumors of like a January announcement, now more likely a March announcement. So, and then culminating in at some time, maybe into like Apple glasses that could be as cheap as like an Apple Watch at like around $500. That, in my opinion, would be an absolute mass market product, but I will not hold my breath until like 2026 to actually see that. Yeah, so they do have an internal team. It's pretty small, very typical to how Apple handles that. Usually, then it goes into like full availability for the whole company once we are talking about like second and third generation products, but before then there's a lot of secrecy when it comes to those devices. So what does Apple Insider still have? Very similar stuff. Oh, that's actually a very good mock-up here, though I do not believe that this mesh fabric is realistic. It looks kind of cool though. Yeah, so that is what we are supposed to be getting, and we are supposed to be getting later at some point a cheaper version of that. And in my opinion, will Apple VR headset slash AR slash glasses, whatever, will be the future, which is what I said in the headline or in the thumbnail. I always forget. I actually think it will be. Now, to be quite honest, I don't think that it will be the future the same way a phone is, at least until we get something more like glasses. But I do believe that for whatever niche of people, like me probably, nerds with some disposable income, if we get that, right, I firmly believe that it will change how we interact with technology, like this niche of people. But for most people in the mass market, I also believe that the first generation will be completely out of the question. Even at $1,500, I think there would be a big question mark. At $2,000, it would limit it back again to that niche, maybe a little larger. And then at $3,000, it would basically leave the market to rich guys and to like so hardcore enthusiasts that they basically cannot stop themselves from buying everything new from Apple. That is my consideration. I think a second generation will inevitably be either cheaper or offer another cheaper solution. But then again, if we never know how much time that takes. For example, we did get AirPods Max, and they are the higher end option of supposedly like AirPods and AirPods Pro. But we didn't, for example, get a sporty version of AirPods Max for anybody who wants like cheaper Apple branded over ear headphones. So we might wait like 3 or 4 years before we get like a full change that is really focused on the cheaper market. And at that point, maybe a lot of people will start waiting for glasses instead. Maybe like by 2030, this is when they will nail the technology. The price will likely still be high, but I do think that it will be basically worth it. If it's like below $1,000. If we go back to like Meta West, if we go back to competitors, I don't honestly think that, like, I think the Oculus will compete, like the Quest, sorry, I hate the naming, like the base Quest, which is like $400. But I do not believe that, here, like the Meta Quest 2, what did they say? It's 450 euros or 550 euros. This is also important. We do not quite know the storage configurations. Will, like, at $3,000, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple just packs in a terabyte of storage so that you could actually like save your movies and TV shows on it, so that you could actually like have some higher fidelity games on it. But I do not fundamentally believe that this will be like, if it is closer to $1,500, then I also wouldn't be surprised if it starts with 256 gigabytes, which opens up a lot of questions on how much you can actually store on that. And then the actual question to me, more is like an Apple enthusiast slash also light gamer, medium gamer, whenever God of War comes out, hardcore gamer, is how good will the gaming be on that headset? Like, how will controls of like controllers like this map to the Apple headset? Will Apple care about it at all? Will they maybe, like, I think it would, for example, like work as Apple currently does on like macOS and iOS, that you could like pair a Bluetooth controller in it, but that's not very immersive in comparison to having like controllers that fully recognize, that have like real buttons, but also still feel like basically an extension of your hand, unlike a traditional console controller. And would that work if you just have your hands, right? Like, of course it would have like the best hand recognition, hand gesture recognition, but and this obviously still boxes you into this form factor. But would it actually be very interactive? How would opening options work? How fast does it work? What is the error rate? Like, all of that remains to be seen, and I am optimistic about what Apple will deliver. Especially once we get to that point where we have something cheaper, we have something more mass market friendly. Maybe at that point Apple also makes like extra controllers just for gaming. But for the first generation, I do not think it's the future yet, except for a very small niche that will still have to use phones, tablets, laptops for most of their regular tech, because it will still look goofy to like their children, their spouses at home. So I do believe that this will be like a niche pleasure, and also a pleasure device depending on how you use it, right? So I am excited for it. I am not overly like over the moon for like the first headset device, but I am really excited for the potential of Apple VR, for Apple AR, for Apple mixed reality, for both headsets and glasses, but primarily for glasses eventually. However, if we do get like a headset around $1,500 with very good functionality, this is something that I will buy, even though by that point I will already own a PSVR 2. So this is kind of like my definitely not unique perspective on it, right? Like, both as an Apple fan, like a Sony gaming fan, but this is what Apple will have to consider. How will they appeal to like people who might want to use it as like 3D engineering, right? Or maybe even for stuff like what HoloLens is used for. Maybe Apple can make them small enough in like a second generation so they aren't obtrusive even for like military exercises. But I doubt that this will be Apple's priority. Apple at its core is always a consumer and prosumer focused brand. So this has been a long video, I know. And my statements still are kind of vague, and that is partially because we don't know the final specs, the final OS, like look and feel, the final price. But fundamentally, this is what I believe Apple has always been moving forward to. Something that maybe not quite the headset, but maybe the glass, maybe eventually like lenses that receive like inputs from your phone, like, or maybe like a brain implant at some point. Apple has always worked in technology that moves away and gives you access to your content, to lets you interact organically with other people, if at least if they are not in the room. If people are in the room, please to actually talk to them and don't use a VR headset. But like for chatting, FaceTiming, even like share play functionality, watching like movies and shows together while somebody else is in a different country or in a different city. All of that is at its core what Apple is about, and I do believe they need to try this. Even if it fails spectacularly, I will be very happy that Apple tried. And as we've even seen with like the recent HomePod revival, is that Apple can sometimes launch something, then discontinue it, and then launch it again. So I do believe that this will ultimately have some success. I do not believe that at ever at any point in the near like 10 years it will reach iPhone level success, but I do believe that it can become an important part of Apple's overall portfolio. And also the public perception of Apple moving away from being like the iPhone company. They already have expanded with Apple Watch and AirPods, and obviously they do have Macs and iPads, but Macs and iPads will ultimately be like less personal than this. And if people can associate Apple with a device that basically completely changes the world they live in, how they perceive it, at least for like home stuff, maybe not yet quite on the streets. Though it would, obviously, I do believe that it would work on the streets and maybe work with like augmented reality like inputs. But it does, however, remain to be seen like what the actual regulations for that stuff will be if you ever get into an accident or stuff like that. So it's all a very interesting future. And then the question, like, what will be the controls like? Will it actually work well in recognizing your hands? How much movement do you actually have to do with your hands, right? Because controller-based input isn't just... I'm sorry. Controller-based input doesn't just exist because... controllers are cheaper and easier than like recognizing your hands or maybe something like a Wiimote. Controllers also exist to give you like 8 buttons in like 30 square millimeters, right? Will the headset be able to replicate that kind of versatility? Like, so it's all very interesting. If you ask me, I think Apple will nail it. Probably not in the first generation, but I will say that by 2025 we will have something, even if it's still like $2,000-$3,000. I believe that this will be worth it. So, my opinion, this is the future, not for everyone, certainly not right now, and it will have to keep evolving. But I'm extremely excited, even though I already have another headset ordered, and I hope that if it launches and if I get it, like when it launches and if I get it, that you will join me on a new quest that is not Meta Quest, on a quest to exploring what Apple's take is on a new mixed reality future. This is MarkTech. At the end, much more optimistic than I thought I would be. Probably a little more energy because the Coke finally went through terms of services YouTube. I mean Coca-Cola, not actual cocaine. And I'm very grateful to anybody who get through now a full hour. I understand this will probably be my least watched video ever, but I'm so excited to just share my opinions with you, and I hope you will participate in sharing your opinions with me. As always, let me know what you thought of the content, the quality of the stream, what you would like to see videos next. Most of you leave comments on Twitter, not actually on YouTube. I'm fine with that for now. Leave a comment about all of that. Also, if you didn't like it, right? I'm always appreciative of constructive criticism. Let me know what you think what will happen with Apple's VR headset, both in its first generation, second generation, and if and when we will ever get glasses. And then also just subscribe, comment, like, share it with your friends and family members who are moronic enough to watch me ramble for an hour. I'm so grateful for anybody who keeps watching and sharing, and I really hope that we will have a long future of sharing content together. This is MarkTech saying thank you again, and also tuning out.